on a Sunday morning. I'm so pleased you're all here. And let's do one more. Thank you, Cheryl, for opening up your mouth. Thank you. I appreciate all of you being here this morning. I thought maybe what I'd do is tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about why I'm in this race. We'll take as many questions as we can, and then if anybody wants to, I'm glad to stay around. We'll take pictures. That's a fun part. That's the fun part. So I'm here, by the way, with my sweetie of 30 plus years, my husband Bruce. Stand up, sweetheart. So we're also here on Memorial Day weekend. And I just want to say on that one, it's Memorial Day is always a very special time for my family. All three of my older brothers joined the military. I was the baby. I was what used to be called a late in life baby. My mother always just called me the surprise. But my three older brothers, who to this day are called the boys, and who are all now back in Oklahoma, they all went off and joined the military. My oldest brother, Don Reed, was in combat in Vietnam for about 5.5 years. We were very lucky to get him back home. My brother John was stationed overseas for a little over a year. My brother David trained as a combat medic. Now, the consequence of that is that at family gatherings, we always had a rule: never choke in front of David. To this day, the man believes that he could perform an emergency tracheotomy. He's ready to go. It makes for some exciting moments at Thanksgiving. Someone goes, and everybody just backs out of the room because David's ready. But I think about it on Memorial Day, about how my mother every day went straight to the mailbox right after the postman left to see if we had a letter from one or the other of my brothers. And on days when there was a letter, you started the rounds. You called Aunt B, and you called Aunt Max, and you called Aunt Alice, and by the time Daddy got home, she'd be waving that she had a letter. On days when she didn't have a letter, she'd say, well, maybe tomorrow. We'll hear from him tomorrow. But it is a reminder of not only how much our service members sacrifice when they go into the military and the commitment they make, but also what it means for all of the families. And it's why, for me, one of the things that I just feel like is a central piece of who we are as Americans is that we must honor our promises to our service members and to our veterans. And we can never back up on that. And that means health care, educational care, all of the promises that we make. Happy Memorial Day. So I grew up in Oklahoma. It's a little flatter there than it is here, a little hotter. But I think we have similar understandings of wind and tornadoes and the like. I grew up in Oklahoma, and when I was growing up, my three brothers and I were growing up, our daddy had a lot of different jobs. He sold paint, he sold carpeting, he sold fencing, he sold housewares. And when I was in middle school, the boys were all gone by then, and Daddy had a massive heart attack. And we thought we were going to lose him. We didn't. He held on, but when he got home, he couldn't go back to work. And that went on for a long time. I remember when we lost our family station wagon, and how my mama used to tuck me into bed at night and kiss me goodnight, and they'd leave, my mama and daddy, and that's when I'd hear them talk. They'd think I was asleep. And I learned words like mortgage and foreclosure. And one day I walked into their bedroom one morning, and there on the bed was the dress. Now, some of you in this room will know the dress. It's the one that only comes out for weddings, funerals, and graduations. And the dress was laid out. My mother was in her slip and her stockings. And she was crying, pacing and crying. And she kept saying, "We will not lose this house. We will not lose this house. We will not lose this house. She was 50 years old. She had never worked outside the home. And she was terrified. And finally she stood there and she looked at me and she looked back at that dress and looked at me. She wiped her face, pulled on the dress, pulled on her high heels, and she walked to the Sears and got a minimum wage job answering phones. And that minimum wage job saved our home and it saved our family. And for many, many years, I always just thought that is the story my mother has taught me. That no matter how hard it is, no matter how scared you are, when it comes down to it, when the need is great, you reach down, you find what you need to find, and you pull it up and take care of the people you love. And it was years later that I came to understand it's not just a story about my family. It's a story of millions of people across this country who, no matter how hard it looks, no matter how scared they are, when it gets hard, they reach down deep, they find what they have to find, and they take care of the people they love. It was only years after that that I came to understand it's also a story about government. Excuse me. Because back when I was a girl, a full-time minimum wage job in America would support a family of 3. It would pay a mortgage, it would cover the utilities, and it would put food on the table. Today, a full-time minimum wage job in America will not keep a mama and a baby out of poverty. That is wrong, and that is why I am in this fight. And understand this, it is no accident, that change. When I was a girl, the question asked in Congress when they were setting the minimum wage was, what does it take a family of 3 to make it in this country? What will give them a toehold, a place they can work from to build some economic security? Today, the question that gets asked in Congress is, where do you set the minimum wage to maximize the profits of a bunch of multinational corporations? Well, I want a government that doesn't work for giant multinational corporations. I want one that works for our families. Now, like I said, my 3 brothers went off and joined the military. That was their ticket, their chance to get out and build a life. Me, I had a different dream. I've known what I wanted to be since 2nd grade. I know some of you didn't decide till 3rd grade, 4th grade. Oh yeah. Well, me, I knew in 2nd grade. I wanted to be a public school teacher. Can we hear it for our... To line my dollies up and teach school. I was tough but fair. That was my dream. But by the time I graduated high school, we didn't have the money for a college application, much less to send me off to 4 years at college. And without that, you don't get to be a teacher. So, like a lot of Americans, I do not have a straight path story. I have a kind of twist and turn story, and here's how part of it goes. Graduated from high school and got a scholarship. Yay! And then at 19, fell in love. Yay! And got married, not to that guy. And dropped out of school. And took a full-time minimum wage job answering phones. And a good life. And one I chose it. But not the dream. And then I found it. A commuter college that cost $50 a semester. Yep, 45-minute drive, cost $50 a semester, and I saw it. That was my chance, and I hung on for dear life. I got my 4-year diploma, and I became a special needs teacher. I have lived my dream. Oh, I love that work. In fact, it's not work. It's a calling. And I probably would still be doing it today, except for another twist. And that is, by the end of the first year, I was visibly pregnant. And the principal did what principals did in those days. Wished me luck, showed me the door, and hired someone else for the job. So, there I was. I was at home with a little baby, couldn't get a job, didn't know what to do, and I got this crazy idea. I would go to law school. Didn't know anything about it, but I sure, I could do this. So that's what I did. Found a public law school. We'd moved by this point. $450 a semester. And headed off, baby on hip, and graduated 3 years later, visibly pregnant. You will detect a pattern. And practiced law for 45 minutes. And then went back to my first love, teaching. I traded short ones for tall ones and have taught all those years in between. Now, I always taught money. Contract law, commercial law, corporate finance, economics, bankruptcy, all the pieces around money. And all of my work has been around one central question. What's happening to working people in this country? Why is America's middle class being hollowed out? Why is it that people who work every bit as hard as my mother did a generation ago find the path so much rockier and steeper today, and for people of color, even rockier and even steeper?
Yes.
And the answer, it's not an accident. It's like the point around minimum wage. It's who government works for. So right now, we have a government that works fabulously, wonderfully, terrifically for giant drug companies. Just not for people who are trying to get a prescription filled. Yep.
Yeah.
Works great for giant banks. Just not for people who are trying to make it payday to payday without getting ripped off. Works terrifically for big oil companies that want to drill everywhere. Just not for people who see climate change bearing down upon us. When you see a government that works for those with money and isn't working so well for anyone else, that is corruption, pure and simple, and we need to call it out. And understand this, whatever issue brings you here today, I guarantee if there's a decision to be made in Washington, it gets touched by money. Money. Campaign contributions, you bet, but so much more. Bought and paid for, experts, think tanks, lobbyists, all. Washington is awash in money. And every decision that gets made tilts just a little bit. In fact, I'll give you an example of this. Go back and look. In the 1990s, we're just starting as a country to get that something's starting to happen. And that there's more carbon in the atmosphere. Don't have it all down yet, don't have all the science, but it's starting. And so what happens? It's the best part of this story. Democrats and Republicans are working together. What changes do we need to make? Do we need to pass some more laws? Do we need to toughen up the EPA? What do we need to do? Because nobody wants to see this country hit a crisis, right? And then along come the Koch brothers. Yeah, you've heard of them. Yep, those Koch brothers, that's right. The ones who make their money on carbon fuels, right? So along come the Koch brothers and some of the oil companies and some of the big polluters. And they say, wow, Congress gets serious on this climate change thing? Man, that's going to change our profit model. That's going to hurt our bottom line. So what do? They send in the lobbyists, you bet, but this is always, oh man, they have a chance. They could invest in carbon capture, right? They could have started doing this in the early 90s. That's going to be the new industry. We'll head in that direction. We'll clean up the air, clean up the water, and we're going to avert this problem. Or they could say, we're going to quit on the carbon side on fuel, and we're going to move over to non-carbon-based fuels, right? More biofuels, more renewable fuels. Instead, they invested in politicians, in campaign contributions, in more lobbyists, and oh, here's the best part, in bought and paid for experts who come to Washington and say, oh, I don't know about that climate and rising temperatures. You know, the dinosaurs loved it, and there was a time 80 bazillion years ago that it was really warm, and, you know, I don't know. Why? Not because they don't get it, not because they actually believe that, but if you can raise enough doubt, then there's an umbrella for politicians to hide under and to keep taking Koch brother money, oil industry money, and do absolutely nothing. You want to understand the climate crisis we face today? Look at 25 years of corruption in Washington, yes. And there's the answer. So, we got a problem. A lot of problems in Washington. What are we going to do about it? Here's my answer. It can't be one little statute over here, one little piece over there, a couple of regulations over here. We need, in this country, we need to have big structural change. Big change. Because when you make structural change, then the rest of the pieces start coming together. The rest of it gets easier. So let me offer you a couple of ideas on big structural change. The first one is right where I started this, on corruption. We need to attack corruption head on. Head on. Now here's the good news. I have the biggest anti-corruption plan since Watergate. Here's the bad news. We need the biggest anti-corruption plan since Watergate. The influence of money is felt in so many places. This really is a huge bill. It touches a lot of things. So let me just give you a sample out of it. First part, end lobbying as we know it. Plug the revolving door between Wall Street and Washington. Make the United States Supreme Court follow basic rules of ethics on conflict. If you want to root out some serious corruption, make every single person who runs for federal office put their tax returns online. One, attack the corruption head on. Part two, we need to rewrite a couple of the structural rules in our economy. And here's the first part of that. We have seen so much concentration now in American industry, so many industries now, where it's just a handful of giants that run everything. The old competitive markets just aren't there. You see it here in big ag. We see it in big tech. We see it in big finance. We see it in big pharma, right? So what happens with these giant corporations? Part of it is they just roll wherever they want to roll. They roll over their own workers. They roll over their own customers. They roll over the communities where they're located. They do what they want to do. How do you think about structural change against that? The answer? We need more power in the hands of employees. And that means make it easier to join a union and give unions more power. class unions will rebuild America's middle class. That's one. Let me give you another way to think about structuring in this economy. I want to see a wealth tax on the biggest 1/10 of 1% of the fortunes in this country. Let me tell you how this would work. So anybody who's got more than $50 million in assets. Yeah, I heard a little bit. Yeah, a couple of people said, I think we're good for a while yet. On your 50 millionth and first dollar, you got to pitch in 2 cents. And 2 cents on every dollar in assets above that. So this is one aimed, and just so you know, this would be for the top 1/10 of 1%. It's a wealth tax. How much have you accumulated in this great fortune? And by the way, anybody in here own a home? Yeah, you all are already paying wealth taxes. Oh, you and the mortgage company own the home, right? But you're already paying a wealth tax. It's just called property taxes. What I'm proposing that's different is to say, wait a minute, for these giant fortunes, you're paying on your biggest asset for most people. What I'm saying is on these giant fortunes, let's include the diamonds, the Rembrandts, and the yachts when we're doing the property taxes. This is not to be punitive. The point isn't to be mean. The point is to say, you built a great fortune in America. You had a great idea. You worked, or you inherited it. I mean, either one. But okay, you have a great fortune. Good for you. But I guarantee that fortune built here in America was built in part using workers all of us helped pay to educate. Yep, was built in part getting your goods to market on roads and bridges all of us help pay to build. Was built in part relying on police and firefighters all of us helped to put out there in the field. And we're glad to do that. We're happy to do that. But all we're saying is when you make it super duper big, when you become the top 1/10 of 1%, put in 2 cents so everybody else gets a chance to make it. And now comes the fun part, and that is, what can we do with 2 cents? And you start to see how 2 cents can restructure this economy. So start with the wealth tax, and with that 2 cents, here's what we can do. Universal child care for every baby age 0 to 5. Universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old in this country. Raise the wages for every preschool worker and child care worker to the professional level. I'm still not through. In addition, we can also cover universal public technical school, 2-year college, and 4-year college for every kid who wants to go. And I'm still not through. There's one more piece. In addition to doing all of that, we can actually cancel student loan debt for 95%. With 2 cents. With 2 cents. Think of the difference that would make in our country, and think of the difference it would make in a community like this. Because this money comes straight back down to the communities. Everybody who's dealing with a student loan, not student loan payments anymore, for those who get the cancellation, that's money that goes into the local economy or money that goes into saving up to buy a house. Child care, it skips the state and goes straight down to the communities and puts that money here in the communities. So parents can finish an education, so they can take a job, so they can take a better job, and so that our babies get the best possible care, whether they're born into families of privilege or born into any other family. That's what corruption head on. The second one is to just change a couple of the structural pieces in the economy. And now let's do the third one. We got to change some rules to protect our democracy. We got to do this, and I'll tell you where I started. I want to see a constitutional amendment to protect the right of every American citizen to vote and to get that vote counted. Repeal every last one of these voter suppression laws and this crazy gerrymandering. It's wrong. Overturn Citizens United. So there it is. 3 things. That's all I want to do. Just 3 things. All right? Attack the corruption, change a couple of the structural rules in the economy, and protect our democracy. And for me, those 3 things are deeply tied to each other. Because for me, it's all about opportunity. It's about what kind of America we want to be. We do those 3 things, we can build opportunity, not just for kids born into privilege, but for every single child, every person in this country. We can build opportunity, a chance to get a good education, a chance to get a good job, a chance, an opportunity to be able to start your own business, an opportunity to buy a home, to start a family. Remember, I'm a special needs teacher. Sometimes what opportunity means is an opportunity to live independently. But it's opportunity. For me, this is deeply personal. My daddy ended up as a janitor, but his baby daughter got the opportunity. An opportunity to become a public school teacher, an opportunity to become a college professor, an opportunity to become a United States Senator, and an opportunity to become a candidate for President of the United States.
This is your big chance to ask the senator a question. Oh, well, heaven jinx.
It's talking about this nothing. What are your thoughts on the judiciary?
All right. So, I think of this question. Let me put this in a little frame. I think of the foundations of democracy. We talk a lot about there are ebbs and flows in American politics. I am married to a legal historian, who talks about ebbs and flows in American politics back around the Revolutionary era. But ebbs and flows. What's changed, and it's not just Donald Trump, it's what's changed over the last 30 years or so, has been a deliberate effort by the Republicans to take some of those constitutional protections out and nullify. One is voting. Just no, right? They have a plan to stay in power by keeping American citizens from voting. That is deeply shocking. One of the 2 major political parties. Another thing has been to try to get a tilted court. And understand this on the tilted courts. It's partly around issues like Roe, absolutely, and used it to help gin up a base. But a big part of it, it's about corporations. It's about the part I was talking about corruption. It's about a court that over and over, when it's a corporation versus an employee, is with the corporation. When it's a corporation versus somebody that the corporation ran over or killed, they're with the corporation. When it's a corporation versus a customer who bought something and it all blew up, they're with the corporation. Over and over and over. A democracy counts on an independent judiciary, not a judiciary that tilts in favor of one political position. So I'm very glad you raised this, and let's talk about what we can do. All right, so first part is to remember, we get a new president, we get new nominees. Yay! The second part is never to treat the courts as, well, we can't do anything now. So Citizens United is a good example. Yeah, I want to overturn Citizens United, but that's going to take when we get another seat on the court, right? We got to be able to push back in the meantime. So I've got a list of about 9 things we can do to expose dark money in Washington that says you won't run afoul of Citizens United, but you've got to push as hard as you can. On Roe, for example, we've counted for 47 years on Roe protecting women. And we've been playing defense. And we keep losing on defense in one state court after another. So let's pull that one out of the courts and put it back into the legislature. The overwhelming majority of Americans do not want to see Roe versus Wade overturned. We can pass a federal law to make Roe versus Wade the law of the land. And that's what we need to do. So I'm standing in fight. I'll give you better judges and I'll fight for the principles we believe in. Thank you. Great question. Okay, Cheryl, who you got?
Okay, let me see who we have here. Susan.
Hi,
Susan.
I wanted to switch to foreign affairs.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Okay.
What do you think about all the what do you think about the troops that are being sent over to something in Iran and the flights, the planes that are going?
Okay.
What's your opinion of what our president is doing right now?
All right, so let's start with an overarching principle. It's a pretty shocking notion, but I want to put it out there for everyone. Foreign policy by tweet does not work. And let me do another couple of big pieces, because it's important. It's important to know the difference between your friends and your enemies. And to keep your friends on the side of friends, right? To work with them. Why? Because when there are problems around the world, whether it's China is engaging in unfair trade practices, or development of a nuclear weapon in North Korea, or the threat now in Iran, you want a lot of nations with you. That's how you're more likely to have influence and get things done. Instead, Donald Trump attacks our friends, separates us from our friends, and now, with the circumstances in Iran, recognize the rest of Europe is on the other side in this. We are going this alone as we keep poking at Iran, trying to provoke some kind of response. That doesn't make America any safer, it does not make the Middle East any safer, and it certainly does not make the world any safer. So, I've gone to the briefings, we push back on this. Donald Trump keeps moving forward. We have got to have a president that has a more coherent vision of foreign policy and sees America's interests over the long term, understands that falling in love with Kim Jong-un, it's the hair. That, you're right. I got it now. At least that one clicks into. And what is it with Putin? It's not the hair. It's the horse. Okay. But that what we have to have is we've got to work with our allies. We've got to have a very disciplined view of what's in America's interest. You know, I mentioned at the top of this about my 3 brothers being veterans. Our military, our service members are extraordinary. And they will do whatever we ask them to do. But that means there is a moral responsibility on us not to ask the military to solve problems that can only be solved by other means. Give them I'm very worried about Donald Trump continuing to poke at Iran, and that Iran will feel the need to respond, and that we will just have things spin out of control in the Middle East. We need to have a better and more coherent plan that watches out for the United States. We'll stay after him. Thank you. Good question.
One more.
Make it a good one.
Go ahead, you.
Hi, my name is Darius Gordon. I think everybody can hear me.
Darius, is that right?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
Darius.
Nice to see you, Darius.
Very nice to see you as well. My question is actually a follow-up about an earlier question about
Sure.
the judicial system. Have you thought, if you become president, about term limits or a rotating panel or some sort of correction? Because right now, 50 years of policies mean that someone who's 18 has to live until they're about 60 for any type of training. So I just want to go in a little bit further into that.
So it's a good question, and I just want to do the plus and minus on this. The plus is exactly what you've identified. That with a stolen Supreme Court seat, and can we all just be blunt? The Republicans stole that Supreme Court seat. With a stolen Supreme Court seat and some young justices on the court, it looks like they may have a majority that locks in for half a century, and a majority that is not committed to following through on our Constitution, but instead is committed to political action. And there are a lot of proposals out right now to try to address it. Some talk about term limits, some talk about pulling more justices from the courts of appeals so that you have rotating decision makers, which would help stretch that out some. Some talk about expanding the Supreme Court, as Roosevelt talked about back in the 30s. A lot of different approaches to it. There are a lot of academics, a lot of policymakers who are writing down and suggesting, and there's a lot of vigorous debate around this. And I'm glad to see it, because I think it's an issue that we should be talking about. But I do want to say the other side. I don't want to see the court become even more political. We built a Constitution on separation of powers, and it served us for over 200 years. We built it on the notion that we would have a Congress that would legislate, we would have courts. There's a reason they got lifetime appointments. It was to try to insulate them from politics, to ask them to do what they believed was right based on what they heard from the people in front of them, from the litigants. And that we would have a chief executive who is not a king. And this matters. It matters not only for where we are in the Supreme Court right now, it matters for where we are on this question of impeachment. You know, I didn't run for president thinking I'm going to do this on let's go impeach Donald Trump. I get it, and I get the political issues around this. But I read the 448-page Mueller report. And when I got to the end, there were three things that were perfectly clear. The first one, a hostile foreign government attacked our 2016 election system to help Donald Trump. It's just there. The second, candidate Trump welcomed the help. It's there. And the third, when the federal government tried to investigate the first two, Donald Trump, as president, did every single thing he could to derail, to block, to distract, to push aside every part of that investigation. That is obstruction of justice, and it is now the constitutional responsibility of the United States Congress to say we are beginning impeachment proceedings based on what's in the Mueller report. For Congress not to act, to say that this is documented. I mean, it's documented in the Mueller report. Not maybe, and on the one hand, boy, it's the witness testimony and the corroboration and the footnotes. It's all there. For Congress to say, yeah, but we don't want to go into that. It seems to me there comes a time on the Supreme Court, on the executive branch, and on Congress. We have to act on principle. We've got to recognize the realities, I know that. But some issues are bigger, and those are the issues of principle for our country. So that's where I'm still working on this. Fair enough?
Agreed.
Thank you.
We're done with questions, but that's what it is. This poor woman has several more to go.
But this is fun.
I know. I want to thank everybody though for coming because it's our responsibility as Iowans with our early caucus to make sure we young people. And what a great thing that Senator Warren being here. So, thank you. Picture taken with the senator. We're gonna. You remember single file line? We're gonna start a single file line here and go around. So.
Okay.
Once she's done, she's
Hold one sec. Hold one sec. I also want to add a thank you to Cheryl again for doing this, and for all of you for showing up on a Sunday morning. There are a lot of things you could be doing, but you came here because you care about the future of our country. You know, 3 things. That's all I want to see us do. Fight back against the corruption, get some better structure in this economy, and protect our democracy. I went back to Washington after the first week that I was out here in Iowa. It was back in January. And one of my Senate colleagues came up to me and said, I followed what you did in Iowa. Good for you, but you know, Elizabeth, you're just asking for too much. You need some things that are smaller. You need just a little compromise. Talk about a couple of bills that look like, they could go through, and you get, but smile more. And I remember thinking, I'm standing there, and I'm trying to be polite, but I'm standing there listening to this person, and I thought, what do you think they said to the early abolitionists? Too hard, man. No change is going to happen in this country. Give up now. What do you think they said to the early suffragettes? They said, too hard. Give up now. What did they say to the early union organizers? You will never get this done. Quit now. What did they say to the foot soldiers in the civil rights movement? Give up now. You can't get this done. What did they say to the LGBTQ activists, right, who wanted equal marriage? It'll never happen, at least not in your lifetime. Give up now. But none of them gave up. They got organized, they built a grassroots movement, they persisted,